What if the CEO of a major company walked into his own store, completely unnoticed? What if he stood in line, just like any other customer, and overheard the raw, unfiltered truth about what it's really like to work for him? That's exactly what happened when David Reynolds, a multi-millionaire business owner, decided to go undercover in one of his own stores. He wasn't looking for praise or recognition. He wanted to see the reality behind the numbers, the reports, and the polished corporate meetings. But what he discovered shocked him to his core. A tired yet kind-hearted cashier caught his attention. She wasn't just ringing up groceries, she was fighting a daily battle to survive. She worked extra shifts, skipped meals, and sacrificed sleep, all while caring for her younger brother after losing their mother. And despite it all, she still greeted customers with a smile. David had built his company on the promise of taking care of his employees. But standing there hearing her story, he realized that promise had been broken. He had a choice: ignore what he had seen or change everything. What happened next would send shockwaves through his entire company, affecting thousands of employees. But what did the cashier say that made him stop cold? And how did this one moment lead to a decision that would change lives forever? Stick around, because this story is about to take an incredible turn. And if you love inspiring stories about real change, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. David Reynolds sat in his penthouse office, overlooking the city skyline. The reports in front of him painted a picture of success: rising profits, expanding locations, steady growth. By all corporate standards, his retail empire was thriving. But something didn't sit right. For months, he had heard whispers, anonymous complaints about employees struggling, murmurs of dissatisfaction buried under polished performance reports. He had always prided himself on running a company that treated its employees like family. But if that were true, why did it seem like something was missing? He could have called a meeting with his executives, demanded explanations, or even sent surveys to his workforce. But deep down, he knew that real answers didn't come from boardrooms or filtered emails. If he wanted to understand what was truly happening, he had to see it with his own eyes. That's when the idea struck him. He would go undercover. The next morning, he left behind his custom-tailored suit and designer watch. Instead, he threw on a simple hoodie, a pair of jeans, and an old baseball cap. He needed to blend in, to become just another customer. No one could know who he was. He chose a location at random, a mid-sized store on the outskirts of the city. This wasn't one of the flagship stores where everything was polished to perfection whenever executives visited. This was where real employees worked hard, where the company's policies either helped or failed them. As he walked into the store, the automatic doors whooshed open, welcoming him into a familiar yet unfamiliar world. He had designed these stores, approved every detail of their layout, and yet something about walking in as a customer made it feel completely different. His eyes scanned the aisles, noting small details: shelves that weren't fully stocked, employees moving quickly but with weary expressions, the subtle tension in their posture. And then at the front of the store, he saw her. A young cashier, no older than her early 20s, stood at her register, ringing up customers with a polite but tired smile. Her name tag read Emily. There was something about her that caught his attention. Not just the exhaustion in her posture, but the way she still managed to be warm and welcoming despite it. David made his way toward her line. He didn't know why, but something in his gut told him that this interaction would change everything. David placed his items on the conveyor belt, watching as Emily scanned them one by one. She moved quickly, her fingers deftly punching the register keys, but her face carried the weight of exhaustion. There was something in her eyes, a deep wariness masked by a practiced smile. Trying to sound casual, he asked, "Long day?" Emily let out a small chuckle, but it lacked amusement. "Every day feels long," she admitted. "But you got to keep going, right?" David nodded, intrigued by her honesty. Most employees would give a simple yes or just a normal shift and move on. But Emily didn't hide her struggles. There was something refreshingly real about her. "Do you like working here?" he asked, pretending to be just another curious customer making small talk. She hesitated, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she was weighing how much she should say. Finally, she sighed and gave a small shrug. I like the people. My manager is great. My co-workers are like family. But the pay? She stopped for a moment, then shook her head. It's just tough, you know? I take all the extra shifts I can, but it's never enough. Rent keeps going up, groceries cost more every month than my little brother. She caught herself as if realizing she was saying too much. David's heart clenched. She wasn't just working to get by, she was responsible for someone else. He knew many of his employees lived paycheck to paycheck, but hearing it firsthand hit differently. Your little brother? He asked gently. Emily looked at him for a moment, as if deciding whether to trust him. Then she nodded. He's 15. I've been taking care of him since our mom passed away. It's just the two of us now. David felt a lump in his throat. Here was a young woman, barely out of her teens, working tirelessly to keep her family afloat. And yet, she was still here, still showing up, still giving customers a warm smile despite her struggles. She handed him his receipt with a practiced, polite, "Thank you for shopping with us," the same way she had with every customer before him. But David wasn't just another customer. He took the receipt, but his mind was already racing. He had come undercover to observe. Instead, he had just found the reason his company needed to change. David walked out of the store, the cool evening air hitting his face, but his mind was still inside. Emily's words echoed in his head. It's just the two of us now. He had spent years building a company he believed cared for its employees, yet here was one of his own, struggling to survive despite working as hard as she could. For a moment, he thought back to his own beginnings. He hadn't always been a CEO. Before the wealth, the board meetings, and the towering office buildings, he was just a young man working odd jobs, trying to carve out a future. He knew what it meant to struggle, to wonder if you could make rent, to feel like no one saw your effort. That feeling, that desperation, was something he had promised himself his company would never allow. And yet, here was Emily, proof that something had gone wrong. Instead of heading home, David found himself parked outside the store, watching as the last customers trickled out. Through the large front windows, he saw Emily still at her register, counting her till with a look of quiet exhaustion. She was one of the last employees to leave, likely finishing her closing duties before heading home to her little brother. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel. He could leave. He could go home. Let this be just another story of an overworked employee, one of the countless struggles that existed in the working world. Or he could do something about it. By the time he made up his mind, Emily was locking the front doors. She stepped onto the sidewalk, pulling her thin jacket tighter around her in the chilly night air. David watched as she pulled out her phone, checking something before starting down the street. She was walking home. That was it. He had seen enough. The reports he had read, the meetings he had sat through, the numbers he had analysed, none of it had prepared him for this. Seeing it firsthand, hearing it in Emily's voice, changed everything. David grabbed his phone and made a call. Get my executive team together first thing in the morning. We need to talk. Because this wasn't just about Emily. This was about every employee in his company who was living like this. And he wasn't going to stand by and let it continue. The next morning, David walked into the company headquarters with a renewed sense of purpose. His usual composed and polished demeanour was replaced by something sharper, more urgent. He had spent the night thinking about Emily, about all the employees just like her. People who showed up every day, gave their best, yet still struggled to afford the basics of life. He had built this company with the belief that hard work should be rewarded. But if employees were working themselves to exhaustion just to survive, then something had gone terribly wrong. As he stepped into the boardroom, his executive team was already seated, exchanging curious glances. They were used to structured meetings, carefully planned agendas, but today there was no agenda. Today, David had something to say. He took a deep breath and began. Last night, I went undercover at one of our stores. No one knew who I was. I walked in as a customer and saw the reality we've been ignoring. The room fell silent. He could see the unease in their eyes. I met an employee, Emily. She's one of our cashiers. She works hard, takes extra shifts, does everything she can to support her younger brother after losing her mother, and yet she can barely make ends meet." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others furrowed their brows in concern. "How many more Emilys do we have?" David continued. "How many of our employees are smiling through their exhaustion, working their hardest for a paycheck that still isn't enough?" One of the executives, Mark, cleared his throat. "David, we offer competitive wages. We follow industry standards." David cut him off. "Industry standards aren't enough." His voice was firm, unwavering. "We built this company to be different. We claimed we cared, but caring isn't just words, it's action. It's making sure that the people who work for us can actually live, not just survive." Silence filled the room. Then David pulled out his notepad and placed it on the table. "Here's what's going to happen." One by one, he laid out his plan. 1. Immediate wage increases. No more scraping by. If his company was successful, then the employees who made that success possible deserved to benefit. 2. Financial assistance programs. Emergency relief for employees struggling with unexpected hardships. 3. A direct line from employees to leadership. No more disconnect. Real stories, real struggles would be heard and addressed. 4. Career growth opportunities. Employees like Emily, who showed leadership and dedication, needed paths to rise within the company. When he finished, he looked around the room. "If we want to be proud of this company, if we want to be more than just another corporation, then this is how we start." One by one, the executives nodded, some slowly, some immediately, but they all saw the truth in what he was saying. The next day, David returned to the same store, not undercover this time, but as himself. Emily's eyes widened in shock when she saw him approach. "Mr. Reynolds?" He smiled. "Call me David." She looked around, confused. "What are you doing here?" David took a deep breath. "I came to tell you that you opened my eyes, and because of you, things are going to change." He told her about the new policies, the raises, and the opportunities being created. As he spoke, tears welled up in her eyes. "You're serious?" she whispered. David nodded. "You deserve this. Every hard-working employee does." Emily covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." David smiled. "You already said it last night. I just finally listened." And with that, the company and countless lives changed for the better.